Welcome back to the Recovering Out Loud podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Scott Mounce. He's the managing partner of Transitions Sober Living, and he's here today to talk to us about what sober living can offer and why it's important. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, Charles.
Absolutely. So why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about Transitions and what you guys do?
Yeah, so my name is Scott Mounce. I own Transition Sober Living. I'm managing partner. We have 7 male sober living homes, 5 in Aurora, 2 in Green Valley Ranch. We're an all pathways program, 12-step life, Frank Hill Recovery, Church, Dharma. I really don't mind what your program is, just as long as you're working some type of a program. And I opened my first house in 2017 after living in sober living for 15 and a half months. So I really believe that 28 days in treatment isn't long enough if you've been drinking or drugging for 30 years. We know the difference of right and wrong. We just have to have more time to learn how to implement that in our lives. So, that's when sober living became real popular back 2015, 16, 17. It's exploded. Uh, Getting people from treatment or the street or probation or parole and putting them around like-minded people that understand exactly what addiction is.
I think that's huge. I mean, you spoke in our pre-show meeting about building your tribe, and I think that's
Right.
just so important because, what I've noticed in coaching work is oftentimes people will have their community, right? And they'll just simply remove the substance from the life, right? But they keep the life intact. They keep the tribe intact and all that. But you have to find new things to replace that, new people, new like-minded people, especially because if you just simply remove the substance and leave everything else the same, all you've done is remove your way of coping with that whole situation. So replacing
Exactly.
that tribe, finding those new people is, I agree, that's huge.
Yeah, I mean, I would say today that 95% of the people I talk to on a daily basis are in recovery. That means I don't have to work a real solid program that day if everybody around me is working a really good program, right? Not that I don't
Right.
work a good program, but I can kind of rely on them. They're not going to say, hey, let's go to a bar and play poker. They're going to say, hey, why don't we go to a meeting? Why don't we go to a coffee shop? Why don't we do some service work and give this away? When I got into this, I didn't believe the notion that you can only keep this if you give it away. And
Hmm.
today, that's how I live. I give this away every day. And service work is the number one thing that's going to keep you sober. Working with another drug addict, alcoholic.
Absolutely. I relate to that in my work as a coach. Absolutely. And I find the work so impactful because that initial higher level of care, I'll just call it, whether it's treatment or forced, jail, prison, whatever it is. I mean, that higher level of care, you got to have something afterwards, some step down. You can't just go from that straight back to your old life necessarily. Maybe some people can, but most cannot. And I think that that's where sober living really shines, being able to have the ability to get out of a dangerous situation, right? Because a lot of people can feel stuck in their old life, like there's no way
Right.
out, kind of thing, But having sober living gives them a way out. It's able to, they're able to start fresh.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of equate it to, let's say you're doing a 28-day treatment program. Okay, well, 15 of those days, you're really not doing anything but detoxing and trying to find out who you are, where you're at, and stuff like that. Then the next 15
Right.
days, you're sitting in class and you're learning stuff that you already know. Drugs and alcohol took away your ability of choice, right? Now that you've got some clean time, 15 days, you have your choice back again. But then 15 days later, it's time to leave treatment. Now by going into sober living, you're around like-minded people that have a little bit more time than you, where you can physically see that it's working in other people's lives. Because if you send me back to my same location that I left and the people that I hurt the most, I feel like I have to walk around on eggshells. And,
Hmm.
if I'm 20 minutes late coming home from a meeting, they're wondering where I've been. Rightfully so, because how how many times did I tell them I wasn't going to do it again? Right.
Mm,
And so I kind of tell my guys, while you're in treatment and for the first year, don't tell your family how you're recovering. They're going to see it. Okay. They're going to see your recovery. They knew you were drinking and drugging before you were willing to tell them. They know if you're recovering or not. And that's what worked for me and my family was I didn't tell them how I was recovering. They came to me and said, you know what, man, it's been a year. We see it in you. We see what you're doing. And it wasn't me telling them, trying to force them to believe my recovery, because truly, right out of treatment, I don't deserve to be believed. I lied for so
mm.
long. So I had to build a foundational, by myself that was strong enough for my family and people around me to say, you know what, there's something different this time.
Absolutely. I think that's huge, and I think that's a very underserved area as well, the support people in our lives,
Yeah.
because it's true. We do have to start over, right? And sometimes earning that trust back can be really difficult, and I think
Mhm.
that for people who are watching, going through that right now, an immense process, whatever you're doing, just remember that not everybody heals at the same rate.
Right.
Some people need more time than others, and that's okay.
Exactly.
Because the amends process, it's not about us. It's about them. It's about getting it
Exactly.
off our chest and giving them the ability to, take that part of their life back. So sometimes it can take a while. And I think that's okay. And I think that's where action comes in, because for me, in my recovery, I would talk. I talked a lot. I spoke well, blah, 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 right? But when
Right.
it came to action, that was a different story. So, when I finally sat my people down and all that, I made sure to stop talking and just start showing the
Right.
action, and then they would
Right.
see the change like you're mentioning. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what it's about. And it's funny that you mentioned, it's like when my family would come visit me in treatment, what did they see? Ping pong, pool, cafeteria, all the good stuff. They didn't know what we were doing in the rooms in the back, the therapy, the one-on-one, the group sessions. And I left them right where I left them. And they were right where I left them when I came back. I got to allow them to heal their way, the same as I had to heal. But I couldn't
Mm.
tell them how I was healing because they didn't believe me, right? I mean, so that's just kind of how I tell my guys, don't tell people how you're recovering. People will know when you are recovering. And, there's no better time than to be in recovery than today. I mean, with the treatment centers, sober living, peer coaching, all the recovery coaching stuff out there. I mean, if you're willing to stay clean and sober, there's so many avenues out there to fill that hole. We had once we got rid of drugs and alcohol, there was a big hole that we had to fill. And that's why I tell my guys, get a sponsor, get a recovery coach, get a therapist. Okay. That's 3 contacts a week that you can talk to somebody, right? Go to your meetings, find out what meeting works for you. Don't go to the meetings I think you should go to, because then that's my recovery, you know, and there's no reason not to recover today with all the outlets and all the support that's out there. And peer coach, like I said, 2015, 16, 17, sober living exploded. Now you see recovery coaching is out there. It's a thing, and it's getting a firm hold in the community and really an asset to recovery. uh, you know, with a sponsor, a therapist. I mean, there's no reason not to recover today.
Absolutely. And I think that comes back to the whole multiple pathways approach too, because a lot of people that I have spoken to early on in my work, they're a little bit standoffish in the beginning sometimes with just meetings and a sponsor, right? Because some people don't like that, right? Some people go into a meeting and they get triggered.
Yeah.
It's just not. The way that I look at it is, recovery is like building a Swiss Army knife, right? You got a bunch of different tools in there. You just got to find which one works best for you, And I think that there's a lot of different options, and I think that the important part, whether it's with a coach or a friend or whoever it is, I think finding those different options for you and trying them out and seeing what works, because if we're truly starting a new life in recovery, as we should be, it's going to be brand new, and
Right.
that means we're going to have to try new things, even if we don't think it's going to fit, even if we don't think that's us. We have to be open minded and willing enough to just try it and see, because that could be the one thing that flips that switch for you, right? That aha
Yeah.
moment where you say, oh man, it's all clicking now.
Yeah. You got to kind of recover your way, right? The
Mm-hmm.
best program work is your own program, right? So if you're an alcoholic, why are you sitting in NA unless that's something you want to do, right? You got to kind of tailor your recovery to fit your needs because everybody's individual. Everybody, we all drank and drugged at different times and got us to the same place, but our programs, there's a million different programs out of there. There should be a million different ways to recover because you've got to be comfortable with your recovery or you're not going to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, some people don't right off the bat want to do a 12-step program. And when I opened my sober living, we were specifically 12-step. And then I realized, I might be missing the boat here. I'm making guys do what I didn't like when I was in sober living. I didn't like going to those meetings. I wanted to go to my meetings. And I wanted to also be okay with the fact that, hey, if I worked all day and I didn't want to go to a meeting that night, that it was fine. I didn't have to go to a meeting that night. As long as I went to bed sober, I'm working what I learned in previous meetings to how to stay sober. And sometimes I got to be able to use that when I can't make a meeting and know that my toolbox is full of tools, but they're going to stay in the box unless I bring them out and want to start using them. You have to be 100% willing to want to recover to be able to get this thing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, recovery is by far the hardest yet most rewarding thing that I've ever done in my life, for
Yeah.
sure, because it takes genuinely starting over. It takes crafting a new tribe, right? It
Right.
takes, finding new ways to respond to situations. I mean, it takes a lot of different stuff, but there's also a massive community that's here to help. It kind of reminds me of two war vets meeting up. When two
Right.
people in recovery meet up and start chatting, and it's a beautiful thing, to be able to have that level of support and care from sometimes a complete stranger. I haven't experienced anything like that before myself. And I want to shift gears for a second, real quick. I want to talk about the car certification. Now, if correct me if I'm wrong, I've understood this to be a certification that certain facilities, sober living facilities, can acquire. But if a licensed practitioner refers someone to an uncertified facility, that practitioner can actually be in some hot water. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so around 2019, there were a lot of sober livings opening up, and we needed a certifying body, somebody to oversee sober livings. People were getting out of treatment, going back to their home, couldn't afford their mortgage, put 10 guys in there, called it sober living, and you can just imagine where that went. Nobody was monitoring them, nobody made sure they had contracts. So that's where the OBH hired CAR to be the certifying body, which is Colorado Agency of Recovery Residences. So they come out and they certify your house. They come out every year. They read your contracts. They talk to your clients. They have a car code of ethics and standards that we have to follow. But yeah, so to become, you don't have to have a car certified sober living, but you can't be referred to by any professional because they can go after that entity that's referring. So a lot of the treatment centers won't are always going to make sure that your car is certified. And even sober living to sober living, even though I consider myself a professional, we're not licensed, we're certified. So we try to only refer to other car certified sober livings. And then there's a grievance policy that they can go, if there's a grievance with that sober living, they can take it to CAR where it's investigated. And it kind of keeps us, we are drug addicts and alcoholics running sober livings. We're no better than anybody else, right? So we have to have somebody that's kind of watching us and making sure that we're doing the next right thing.
Yeah, and I think that's huge, and if there's any people watching right now who, they're considering sober living for themselves or maybe for a loved one or something, I would think that hearing about that certification process would it would ease my mind if I was in that situation, you know, because I think sometimes, you know, the fear of the unknown can come up, right? We don't know what a sober living situation looks like. We don't know what it's going to be like, what to expect, any of that. But just knowing that there is a certifying kind of managing body overseeing all of this to make sure everything is safe and up to standards and all of that, I would think would bring some peace of mind because you know when we remove that substance from our life, it's so important to be able to have a safe space to call home, to be
Right.
around like-minded people, to you know really get back to the basics of life sometimes even. And you know having a place to do that, I think is huge. You know, I know some of the people that I've worked with over the years, I mean sober living has genuinely saved them. You know, they were
Yeah.
you know stuck in some bad situations, they felt like, and being able to have that sort of outlet, that sort of escape to the beginning of a new life is such an important step. So
Yeah, and I mean, and you can go to carcolorado.org and go to certified residents, and it lists all the cars certified. You can click on it. It takes you to their website. I say, you know, do your due diligence, just like you do when you go to a treatment center or when you want to get a recovery coach. You know, call all the sober livings. I mean, if you work in Longmont, why are you calling me and my house is in Aurora? I'm going to say, hey, let's look up some Longmont ones that are car certified. Call them. I mean, it's not about coming to my sober living. I want to say that, you know, I, I kind of just, I support sober living as a whole. And we do, you know, there's a group of us, about 35 of us, that are car certified, that every quarter we have a sober living owners dinner where we sit down with the owners and we have dinner together. What are you doing differently? Are you full? You know, what can we do better in this area? Then we do, you know, the opposite of addiction is connection. So we have, you know, Fourth of July parties at Aurora Mall with 15 sober livings, and we supply all the food and music, and we have a meeting while we're sitting there. And it's just about bringing this community together. And you know, if you come to my sober living and you're not the right fit, I'm not going to kick you out onto the street. We're going to find another sober living for you to go to. And it's just since we've opened up and we, you know, all of us are on Slack together, so we kind of refer back and forth. It used to be if you had a relapse, you had to leave, go to the park, stand down at the end of the street. I had never agreed with that. So we came up with this idea to where, okay, let's get you to a detox, but before you go, let's call this other sober living and see if you can have a bed the moment you come out. Just because you didn't make it in my program doesn't mean you're not going to make it. I didn't get this the first time in my recovery, and it took somebody to give me that second chance to get it. So
mm,
it's just amazing how collaborative sober livings are today. I mean, I've housed people for other sober livings for 2 weeks until they had a bed opened and they moved over there. You know, that's what it's about. It's about sober living as a whole, not independent of transitions. My fiance owns Zen Mountain Sober Living for Women. So she does women's houses, I do men's houses. And, you know, like I say, it's just so collaborative. If we see you're not a fit for our program, we're going to find another program for you to go to.
yeah, I think that's huge. You know, even just having that collaborative sort of innovative approach to sober living as a whole is huge because you know the reality today is that you know with fentanyl and everything, you know we can't necessarily approach it the same way that we used to, right? And it's so important now to make sure that people have a place to land, you know.
Yeah.
And you're right, I mean there are certain you know focuses that certain sober livings will have. So if one, just like treatment centers, you know, so if one isn't necessarily the greatest fit, it's important to find the one that is. So I love that you guys have that kind of communal approach to it because I think that's what it takes to get through this. You know,
Yeah.
we've got to have
I
people
mean,
around us.
yeah, and my program's not for everybody, but if you get to my program and you need a little more structure, a little less structure, you know, I'm a wealth of knowledge when it comes to sober livings. You know, like I say, we all eat, we have dinners together. I'm also on the board of CAR, so I know a lot about sober livings. we will find you the right location. And like you said about fentanyl, we used to have time to the bottom when we were drinking and drugging. We don't have that anymore. It's in street weed. It's in everything. And it's a crisis out there that we can't, if somebody has that relapse, throw them out onto the street because they're just going to continue to use again. So it's our obligation to get them to an ER, to a detox, and have another location for them to go when they get out. So they don't go out there and do fentanyl or something like that.
Yeah, that's huge. And I'd like to touch on the, you mentioned that you were in sober living yourself, and now obviously you own one as well with a partner. And I'd just like to touch on the impact of sober living, just kind of on a personal level for you, having been through it yourself.
I think it's a necessity. I mean, not everybody has to go to sober living to recover. That's not anything anybody's saying. But like I said, it's a if you've been using for 20 or 30 years, you know, a little bit of treatment isn't gonna solve the problem, right? And when you're in treatment, that's the safest and easiest your recovery is ever going to be. You're in a locked unit, you're around people that don't have drugs or alcohol. But the moment you get out, it's just this sensory overload, right? So if you go straight from treatment to sober living like I did, I was around like-minded people. I had that fear that if I went out and used, I might get UA'd when I came home. And also I was around people that I started to hear say, "Man, I'm having a bad day. I want to go drink or drug," and then seeing somebody say, "Hey, why don't we sit on the couch and watch a movie? Or why don't we talk about it? Why don't we go to a meeting?" Uh, you know, and I started to learn these roles that I could play in somebody else's life. I truly don't believe I can help anybody. I can walk alongside working my program and hope that a seed is planted. But I also learned from a guy who's got 28 days in recovery and I have 8 years. I still learn from them. Everybody in life's a teacher. Some people are going to teach me what to do, and some people are going to teach me what not to do. And I have to be open to that. Mine's not the only way to recover because I, I it took me a long time till I was 49 years old. Like I said, I relapsed after 23 years of sobriety, and I have 8 years now. But the 8 years I have now is so much better than that 23 years I just stayed dry from cocaine and alcohol, didn't do anything, because I'm in service work today. I get to give this away to people. I get to learn from people. I went to therapy and I learned what was mine and what I didn't have to carry around anymore. And it's just amazing. And that's what sober living did for me. Was I went to a very strict sober living. It was 3 meetings a day if you weren't working, a meeting a day if you were working, church on Sunday, you know, house meetings and stuff, which was a little bit much for me. So I developed a little softer sober living than that. I want my guys to know recovery or learn it the moment they come in, figure out their program, what works for them. I have 80 men a month and 80 different programs. And, that's just kind of how my program worked. But it's such a valuable tool, whether it's for 30 days or I have guys coming up on 4 years in the house. Okay, it's not up to me as an owner to tell you when you're ready to go. Only you know when you're ready to go. And we get the houses, and it's all these guys that live in the house that turns it into home. That's their home, and that's where they live, and that's where they're going to build their recovery from. And so there is no length of stay at transitions. You can stay as long as you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, working, volunteering, going to school, working some type of a program. And sometimes, for me, working a program is maybe just sitting home that night and not going anywhere, and using some of the tools that I learned earlier on how to stay sober sitting in a house, and also being around other people, and maybe reaching out to somebody. Hey man, you look like you're struggling today. How can I help you? Or what can we do? Why don't we get you out of your headspace and go to a meeting?
I love that, and what you're describing. to me sounds like kind of the early stages of a peer model, right? You're having these people who are able to teach and show a different way to live, and I think that without being in that environment, it would be really difficult to find, men who are vulnerable, who say, "Hey, I'm having a bad day. I'm opening up. I'm communicating. I'm trying something different." I think without seeing that, it can leave that side of us stuck and unopened, even sometimes. And having it be from somebody who's been in our shoes, who's currently walking in our shoes, even, I think can make all the difference in the world because we can relate to them. We can, learn from them in a very different way, I think.
Yeah, and I think being a drug addict, alcoholics, we're creatures of habit, right? We're doing the same things over and over and over again every day to get drunk or high. So when you're sitting in a sober living and they're not using and they're going to meetings, for the guy that may not want to go to meetings, all of a sudden he's sitting there and seeing three guys get up and saying, "Hey, I'm going to go hit this AA meeting." You may not go because you want to, you go because you have to at first. And we just hope that a seed is planted and you just kind of learn from the people around you. I mean, not everybody that comes to sober living is going to stay sober. That's the sad part about it. But, that's a learning experience for the guys that are staying sober, that, we're only 12 inches away from picking up a drink, right? What are you going to put in that 12 inches to not pick up that drink? Are you going to be honest? Are you going to say, "Hey, I'm having a bad day. I really have a craving right now." For so long, people were shunned and have to be ashamed to say they're a drug addict, alcoholic. I mean, I'm not ashamed of where I came from because it's a learning experience. And, I built habits in 8 years. I didn't never made a bed in my life until I got it to a sober living home. Now I make my bed every day. At least I do one thing that morning is make my bed that I've completed throughout the day. And and I learned that by watching my roommates. They get up and make their bed, and I'm like, okay, I guess that's what we're doing today, and now that I've done it so long, it's natural to me to get up, make my bed first thing, you know, take a shower, put on clean clothes now. And this is what I kind of observed in these houses of sober living. And, you know, if you get to a sober living and it's not working, you have to be honest and say, "Man, this isn't working." Go talk to somebody, reach out to another sober living, talk to your house managers. All my houses have a house manager that, has a wealth of knowledge of, okay, it doesn't matter if you stay with me or not. It matters to me that you stay in recovery. And you may have to do that in a different sober living. And that's totally fine. That is perfectly fine with me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that it's just important to have that change. And on the surface level, for people who are, new to recovery, who are kind of, listening through some of this sober living discussion, it might seem, interesting that we start with the basics again in sober living. But when we're in our active addiction, we're not taking care of ourselves, right? We're not getting up, making our bed. We have no higher power except our substance. We're not connecting with people. We're not doing any of that stuff, right? We're going out, finding our substance, and figuring out a plan to get it, and so on. And I think rewiring that part of our brain is so important because, it does take humility to start over. It does take courage to look in that mirror and say, "I see a problem. I don't like it, but I'm going to do something about it." And sometimes that takes starting over with, even just basic daily tasks, making sure we're doing that, making sure we're brushing our teeth, making sure we're going to the doctor if we need something, making sure that we keep our space organized. Because mentally, if we walk into a messy, discombobulated sort of environment, it can affect us 100%. So if we're walking into something where, we're even proud, right? That's even a small win. Just getting up, making the bed in a day, right? We can start there. It's a small win, but the more that we chalk those wins up, the more wins we get under our belt, the stronger we're going to feel, and the more, empowered we're going to feel to take back control of our life and move forward, you know. So just remember that, you know, sometimes it takes starting over, right? And there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing wrong with that, right? Because it's a courageous act.
Yeah.
Because 99% of the population out there, that's a made up number, but you get the point. 99% of the population out there, they'll see a problem in the mirror, but they don't do anything about it, right? They just
Right.
cover it up with their substance or their activity or whatever it is, you know? So at least have pride for yourself in the fact that you're standing up and you're taking that first step to try and reclaim your life for yourself. So,
Exactly.
um,
And and
yeah,
time takes time, right? Recovery takes
mm,
time. We didn't get addicted in one day. We have a whole lifetime of trauma and ADHD and bipolar. So give yourself a break. And one thing I learned in early recovery is I don't have to solve everything today. Tomorrow I can work on a little bit. The next day I can work on a little bit. Because when I try to solve problems just at that moment, I usually create more problems for myself and the person I'm trying to deal with. So I get to pause. I get to sit back. I can say, hey, I understand what you're saying. Why don't we give it about half hour and let's come back and talk about it? I just pause and I find that a lot of situations can be put off for a day that I always thought had to be done right then because, I wanted to close the deal. I wanted to prove I was right. And guess what? I'm not right all the time today, and I'm okay with that.
yeah, I like that. I think that, you know, lends itself to the ability to be open, to be wrong, to think in a different way, you know, all of that, all of those very human things, you know. And I think that being able to kind of, you know, peel back some of those layers of the onion that, you know, whether it's our ego or our experience or our name, our title, whatever it is, being able to peel those things back and get back to the basics of who we truly are can genuinely save us, you know. Because I think sometimes when we have this grand facade put up in our active addiction, you know, we can start to believe that that's who we are. And when we remove that, some people can get lost, right? They don't
Yeah,
know who they are anymore, and they have to start fresh. You know, I experienced that myself, right? Like when I got clean, I mean, my taste in music changed, my taste in friends changed, the way I approach problems changed. I mean, like I genuinely started fresh, you know. And I
right.
think that that's what it takes. You have to, you know, empty the darkest corners of yourself in order to have space for some new stuff, you know. And it's hard work, but it's worth it because it's genuinely like a reset button, you know.
Right.
Because once you get to that place of rock bottom and then starting over again, you can go wherever you want, go in
Yeah.
any direction you want, you know.
And the sky's the limit if you long as you stay clean and sober, right? I think that one thing drugs and alcohol rob from us is our ability of choice. We're only responsible for that first drink. After that, it's just free falling, right? And it's about making decisions today that I'm going to do the next right thing no matter what. I never have to drink or drug again. But what am I going to do to create solace in the fact that I'm not going to do that? I mean, a lot of us are adrenaline junkies, and then we got rid of what was making us an adrenaline. Now we're sitting around like things aren't fast enough. That's good. That's okay. They don't have to be fast today. And, that's what putting one day in front of, doing one day at a time. And then all of a sudden you have a month, then you got 3 months and 9 months and a year and then years, and then it just becomes human nature. I don't wake up today thinking about, wow, where am I going to go get high? I wake up and, wow, I wonder what I can do today and help another person or walk alongside another person. Or maybe I'm just going to check in on somebody I think might be having a problem. And, let's talk about it. And sometimes that's all it takes is that phone call to make me feel like, wow, you know what? This is where I want to be. That was a great conversation. Whether I helped them or not, whether they helped me or not, it's the fact that I reached out and I made myself vulnerable to hear if they were going to be vulnerable and kind of work on a solution together.
I love that. Yeah, because you know that act of initiating the vulnerability can be really, really helpful for another person who maybe would not have done that, but seeing another person do it invites us to kind of do the same, and I think that that's a very important part of all this, because sometimes, I mean, growing up, we were always taught, toughen up, man up, that kind of stuff, right? Just deal with it, da da da, all that, right? And it's not the case, that's something that unfortunately did some damage to some people growing up, because we were always taught, the only emotion men show is anger, right?
Right.
Aggression, right? That's how we get our point across. That's how we get respect, all that kind of stuff. So being around people who are doing the opposite, that's huge, right?
Yeah.
Especially if we've never seen that before, if we've never experienced that before. I mean, that's a big kind of altering moment.
Yeah. I think one thing that was big early on for me was some of my biggest help or was just not saying a thing, but just sitting there listening and understanding what they were saying. And, not solving that problem for them, but when they were done speaking, say, you know what, I understand. I don't have a solution, but I understand. And, for, my background and I did 10 years in prison. The last thing I wanted to do was talk feelings with anybody. But, it's something I've learned along the way that, just sometimes having an open ear and a closed mouth will help that person tremendously, as it helps you because you get to really listen to what they're saying.
Yeah, that's massive. Because that comes back to the whole starting fresh, and being able to live in a different way and genuinely start over. So I think that's huge. And the other thing I wanted to mention too, real quick, you were talking about reaching out to others when they need a hand and that sort of stuff. And I just also wanted to mention real quick that sometimes, just for those support people listening, or people who have someone they're concerned about in their life, one of the facades that we can put up is being the jokester, right? Making everybody laugh. That's deflecting, right? That's a tool that can be used in a very negative way. So it's important to check in on the ones who seem happy and good and all that stuff as well, right?
Right,
Because sometimes what's going on under the surface, under the skin, is very different, And I think building that safe space with them where they can talk about whatever's on their mind without being judged, without getting, in trouble, or whatever it is, right? I think that's so important, because too much of addiction and mental health and all that is swept under the rug, right? It's
right,
kept in the closet until it bursts out, and then we have to focus on it, right? But if we can get used to opening up a little bit more, having that safe space, just communicating, right? Talking about these things. It's going to make a world of difference,
right,
And just remember that, even if you have never had an addiction in your life or anything even close to that, just remember you can still support, right? You don't necessarily have to know what it's like to be an addict, but just know that it's very difficult and they need you, you know?
right. Yeah, we don't have to solve everybody's problems. You know, we just need to hear it and, and try to
Yeah.
come to a solution together, right? I mean, I always wanted to solve people's problems. I don't have to do that today. I just have to listen. And like you said, you have to kind of be able to read people and people that are happy go lucky every day. Sometimes they're the ones suffering the worst. And it's that ability to be able to read into that. Nobody's happy every day, you know,
Yeah.
and you just kind of got to look for it. And the more people you reach out to, eventually, you're gonna find that right person, call it that right time, and be that help that that person was looking for.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, I love that. And I just wanted to see if you have any, just kind of closing remarks, things you'd like to add as we sort of wrap up the episode.
Well, just that you never have to drink or drug again. There is a solution out there, and it's not drugs and alcohol. This is a thinking problem, not a drinking problem. I want to work.
Mm,
I tell my guys, you have a you problem. If you can pass a UA
mm,
today, you have a you problem still. So what are you going to do about that? If you spend a night in jail, just your upbringing. There's a lot of trauma that we don't think was trauma that we have to deal with. We were drinking and drugging to change the way we felt. So it tells me that this is a thinking problem. So I want, if you're out there, work on your thinking, get a therapist, talk about, your childhood, talk about, get rid of all this baggage that you're carrying, and then you don't have to pick up a drink. And recovery is possible. Recovers, you know, my recovery today, I got sober November 15th, 2015. My program today is so much different than it was back then. Let your program evolve. You know, your program's allowed to change. You're allowed to change your pathway. If it's not working for you, don't force it. There's another program out there. And recovery, like you said, is amazing. And at the end of the day, it becomes second nature to me that I don't feel like I have to try to recover today because I have recovered. The big book says we do recover. And I truly believe that I've recovered today by putting certain things, service work, sharing my story, doing stuff like this, just sitting down with somebody and saying, hey man, how are you doing today? And I think that's where recovery comes from. It's the opposite of addiction is connection, and I try to connect with everybody.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us. And if any of our viewers are interested in transitions or any other sober living, I'll have a link for their website down below. Feel free to post comments or questions or anything like that, and I'll respond to those. Scott, thank you so much for coming on, and appreciate the knowledge and wisdom that you've shared with us today.
Thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you.